Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough. You can follow us online at rockstarcfos.com. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our two sponsors, Payhawk and Planful, who make this and all of our episodes possible. We have a great guest today, so let's get to it. Rock on. Well, I have a really exciting guest today. I know you're going to love to hear from her. Virpy Richter is the CFO of Awin Global, and she is our first ever guest from Germany. Virpy, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
No, glad to do it. And I have to admit, I wasn't previously familiar with Awin. I guess I can be forgiven. But do you want to share the 10,000-foot view on the company?
Oh, yeah, more than happy to do that. So as Awin, we're a global affiliate marketing platform. And what we do is we provide technical support, payment organization, and adding a collaboration between our affiliates, which are kind of on one hand publishers, and then on the other hand with our merchants, which we call also our advertisers. And basically what we help them is to grow their business together, as we also call that internally to infinitive partnerships, simply enabled, how we want to drive that forward.
Fantastic. And how long have you been with the company?
It's going to be 5 years and a couple of days. Quite exciting.
Well, happy anniversary then, because I
Thank
did
you.
notice your background. You do have a history of longevity. You were with the company, and we'll talk about it later, but you were with them for 15 years, as I recall. So
Yeah, that's true.
great. But we'll get into that. But first, I want a little bit about you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Berlin, in Germany,
And you're living there now, right? So-
and I live there now. Yeah, I moved a little around the places, but back to Berlin, and I need to say I really love my home city.
Yeah, you do have a bit of a complex accent, and I know you've lived a bunch of places, including Russia, I believe. But cool. But when you were growing up in Berlin, what was your first ever job?
I was tutoring at the time in Latin, and I guess like almost simultaneously, I started to sell ice cream.
Wow. Okay. So a Latin tutor selling ice cream. That's an interesting combination of jobs. Sounds like it's two different jobs, not one, right?
In a way, yeah, it also has been on different places, but both quite interesting.
So, and it's interesting. Do a lot of people in Germany, is Latin used very often? Because like in America, it's basically if you have a medical background, you study Latin, but the average American doesn't really have a lot of use for Latin. So
I guess I need to say at that time, and I mean, I'm a little older by now, so it has been quite a while since I went to school. A lot of schools still had this as a second language. So obviously we all started with English, but then as a second language, there was still a lot of Latin around, also as a good fundament to learn all the Roman languages, right? Like Spanish, Italian, French, etc. And I guess by now it's potentially reduced a little, but there are still quite some schools who are offering it.
yeah, because I remember going to the Latin Mass as a child, and my parents would take me. There was like an English Mass and a Latin Mass. They'd always make me go to the Latin Mass. I couldn't understand a word that was being said. I'm like, what's the point of this? So, but a different era for sure. But I noticed you studied applied sciences at the University of Berlin. And when you were young, did you envision yourself becoming a scientist?
No, not really, but I felt it's kind of interesting to, have different perspectives and also bring that into a more economic background. So I always felt it was a good way in understanding a little more as well the world of tech, while always my focus, well, that's something I learned throughout my studies, that I have more my focus on economics than on the more, let's say, informatic or tech world.
Okay, so you didn't necessarily want to be a scientist, but did you envision like a career in the world of finance when you picked that as your field of study?
I guess a little later in my studies. When I started, no, I thought it's kind of more broad and it's good to have different possibilities and also be open to it. But then by the help, I need to say, of a lot of internships, I felt very quickly that obviously like analytics, looking at the business, understanding it from a number perspective was more what was getting more my attention than other topics. And this is why I went more into that direction.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And, with hindsight, it's actually probably a good choice. I don't know that you would have envisioned it when you were 19 or 20 years old, but like to me, the most important skill that CFOs talk about is their problem solving ability. And who's a better problem solver than a scientist, right? I mean, that's the essence of science is solving problems. So have you found that you developed sort of some, I don't know if intuition is the word, but some skills and a natural bend towards problem solving that's helped you in your role as a financial leader?
Oh, absolutely. I would feel like getting this idea of how can I solve a problem? How can I approach it? How can I identify what are the problems, the root causes, etc. I guess that's crucial. Reflecting back, interesting question. I feel potentially more through this different internship, which I did throughout my studies. I was indeed kind of thrown at different problems, right? So at that time, you did not really grasp this fully. But in hindsight, I felt like, thank you very much for all these people around me who have thrown me on these different questions. I remember one of my first internship, I needed to review how our retail chain was choosing different locations to set up a store. And that was after my first semester of studies. So what did I know, right? So it was like, oh my gosh, how do I kind of tackle this? What kind of procedure, how to approach, how to talk to people? But these things was really what kind of shaped the thinking and give you this idea until now. Hey, that's something you could really benefit from. This idea of, as you mentioned it, yeah, problem solving, getting into the unknown and find your way.
Absolutely. That makes sense. I'm going to put it on pause for a moment. I forgot to close my door and there's people outside. I don't know. Someone actually walked into my office.
No worries. I said my son not to walk in. I hope he read his message.
Well, those are some great observations. And, it's just fascinating how the role of the CFO has evolved from sort of a historian to a problem solver. But I want to touch a little further on your career path because yours has been one of the most interesting of anyone that I've come across. Tell a little bit, what are some of the key things you've learned along the way in your career that have prepared you for your current role? And I know you've lived in multiple countries, so I'd love to touch about that. How many countries have you lived in?
I mean, kind of really lived in might be potentially like next to Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Russia in a way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That counts. That's 3 more than me. So,
yeah, I guess to review on your question, it's potentially a little on the different kind of episode or periods of my career. When I think back, like my first job, and that was the one where I also went to the Netherlands, right? I started off as a portfolio manager, I guess a typical career starting point for a CFO. And after 2 years of a little traveling Europe at the time and always coming out of this consultancy role, I felt very much, well, it's great at the age of 23, 24, I tell other people how to do. I have no clue on to doing this myself. I need to jump to the other side and really, learn my skill set from the scratch. And this is when I was given the opportunity to move to the Netherlands and live there for 2 years as a commercial director. And obviously that was quite a challenge because I was 27 at that time. I had 20 people to kind of lead in the team, and a lot of them being much more experienced than I was. So I guess that was a first lesson for me to basically question everything and stay pretty curious on things happening. So if I put this to the first step, then moving, as you mentioned earlier, at My Toys, yes, where I stayed like overall 15 years. It's a long period of time, but we started as a startup. When I joined them, we were like 20 people, something like 20 million in terms of revenues. And when I left after 15 years, jumped up to 2,000 people and 500 million. So really kind of was able to go from scratch. And that was also the time when I moved to Russia and kind of built the copycat model of My Toys in Russia and acting as a CEO for 5 years. I did not live there like permanently, but always kind of jumping back and forth between my CFO hat in Germany and the CEO one in Russia. And I guess as we built up everything from scratch there, it was very much about gathering the right people around you, identify the right talents, and together with them, kind of bringing things forward. And what was very important at that time for me was that people had the right mindset to kind of drive things forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And definitely challenges. It's funny. I chuckle a little bit. You're delivering toys in Russia because I believe some people believe that Santa Claus was Russian, right? St. Nicholas. So you were kind of like Santa Claus in some ways, delivering toys to Russian children. So
In a way, and we have more time because their toys will only be bought after New Year's Eve. It's only coming traditionally on the 6th of January.
makes some sense. So I'm always curious if just about everybody I've interviewed who's an executive had an important mentor, even multiple mentors along the way. And I'm curious, are there any, as you look back on your own career path, that have stood out and say, wow, that person made an impact?
Absolutely. I guess it would be my first boss at my very first job I had at Halitz, the one where I just mentioned, also moved to the Netherlands. She was the head of the FP&A department, a female leader at that time, which was rare at that time, one need to say, at least in Germany. And I was very inspired by her because coming within the FP&A department, right, she was very analytically driven, kind of as a very smart person, but at the same time being very empathetic and kind of a good role model, the way how she was leading the team. And I guess there were a lot of very good topics which I spotted and which I learned over time. And some things like, like these little memories, you're always kind of coming up these days and feel like, oh yeah, this is the way how she had done it, is a good inspiration to just reflect on yourself. And it's quite nice. I just recently been at her birthday. So it's nice to still be in touch after, this has been now 25 years.
So,
but still nice.
Yeah, that's fantastic that you've been able to keep in touch all those years. So, but now since she made such an obvious impact on your career, do you yourself serve as a mentor to any other young professionals?
Oh, absolutely. And I absolutely enjoy this. I think it's a great opportunity for an exchange and also on one hand support, share your own knowledge, right, but also to be challenged, to learn from different perspectives, specifically from younger people, which I guess it's an amazing opportunity. So yes, we do this within Awin, have set this up as an Awin mentorship, but we also do this in the broader Axel Springer group. As you know, Awin is part of Axel Springer, so there it's also cross different assets and company within the whole group. And I'm doing both because I really enjoy this a lot.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you mentioned learning from the mentorship. And that, to me, that's one of the underrated benefits of being a mentor. I actually have like a reverse mentorship relationship where I'm a baby boomer and she's from Gen Z. And, she's taught me every bit as much as I've taught her, probably more as a matter of fact. There's just so much to learn and the world changes so quickly. And, who better to teach you than the recent college graduates entering the workforce. And by the way, they can learn from me too. So,
that's obviously the perfect match, right? If you end up in having a win-win situation,
yeah,
then that's also super helpful.
Yeah. Well, my first one was my niece. It turns out we're too close to have that type of a mentor relationship. So, but I've got a great one right now. It's very productive. So, but I'd love to chat with you a little about Awin and, at the risk of the most obvious question, because it's a really exciting company, but what is it that attracted you to the role?
Yeah. What attracted me to the role is, first of all, it's a digital business model. So after I've been working like in retail, so always, like sitting as a CFO on inventory and all these kind of different questions, it was very interesting to move in a complete kind of digital business model. That was one very interesting part. The other interesting one was, and I need to say, although I always lived and worked in different countries, all the other companies were more like set up classical headquarter based in Berlin or Germany, not Berlin, but based in Germany. And you always had this more headquarter thinking and then subsidiaries, right? And this is kind of really the first company where we truly think globally and where we also come from a global mindset, which is very enriching because that gives you so many more perspective and a global mindset, which I absolutely love. On top of this, Awin as a company is very people-centric. Not that that was new to me. I experienced this in other companies before. That was all very interesting. And speaking of the global footprint, I would say specifically, we are very strong in Europe, right? And obviously, the US is a very important market to us. And that was also very interesting for me because I haven't been in touch so much with the US market. So seeing as well the growth opportunity and things to move further into the US was also something where I was very thrilled by.
Interesting. And so tell me a little about your team at Awin. How big a team do you have?
It's kind of 110 people within the CFO remit.
Okay, so that's a sizable team. I didn't realize it was quite that big. And what's the company culture like?
Oh, the company culture, it's an amazing company culture, but that's not what you want to hear. You want to get a little more grip
Oh,
on
you can
this.
tell me how amazing it is. So,
I guess a very good way to kind of translate that is by our values, right? And our values, very nicely put, say act Avon. So why is it act Avon? Because every of these single letters represent A for accountability, C for K, T for trust to bring it to the act. And then you have Avon for ambition, a win-win-win mindset, inclusivity, and nimble, which very vividly, let's say, describe our current culture. Not our current one, but the one we always have lived in. And I guess for me, the most important one is that on one hand, you feel like the ambition and the win-win piece, which is helping our partners, our customers to evolve their business on one hand, but also with a very relevant component in terms of trusting and caring for our people who are kind of enabling all this success, right? And searching for new solutions for our partners. And that's a perfect combination for me.
that makes sense. It's funny, like that's one of the more interesting answers I've gotten when I've asked about the company culture. But I'm waiting for the day for somebody to say, "Oh God, it's an awful place to work. I can't wait to get out of here."
I mean, that would be interesting to understand. What do you do about it?
Oh yeah, it would be a fascinating conversation. I can't imagine anyone, even if I don't think it's likely that any of my guests have deep down thought that, but even if they did, I think it's probably the type of thing one keeps to themselves. So, but
I assume you're right. Yeah.
yeah, presumably. But I want to ask you a little about your relationship with the CEO, Adam Ross, just because the way the CFO role's evolved is, that's probably the most important partnership across the C-suite, if not the entire company, to the point some people, I've been hearing the phrase that CFOs are almost the deputy CEO, and you function in that capacity. So I'd love to, explore that a little bit. What's the dynamic between you and Adam? And I believe he's a Brit and lives in England. So I'm wondering if, not that it's all that far to you, but yeah, how that impacts things.
It's interesting that you say that. I guess sometimes there is a slight difference between the cultural background between Germany and the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess sometimes we Germans tend to be a little more direct, and my British colleagues seem to be a little more polite. So I guess that's the interesting part, right? Different cultures also mingling together in the company and also kind of learning from each other and giving different perspectives. But to your question, Adam and I, we do have a very good relationship, I guess a very trusted relationship, which for me is very important because I feel like one of the main topics is that, first of all, you have an honest conversation. You can have an honest conversation about the company performance, about topics you're spotting, about some challenges you think you need to discuss, right? So it's on one hand on the company topics, but it might also be, and I also love to be challenged, right? So, but I also love to challenge. So it's kind of a vice versa. And this is what, based on trust, you can allow this to happen, right? So this is very trusted, allowing to challenge each other. This is kind of on our relationship. But I would like to add, as you're saying, yes, there is always between the CEO and the CFO. But what is important to me, and I feel we're very living this at Awin, is it's not only the CEO and CFO. I feel like as a board, we're four of us, like really having this trusted relation and having a very close collaboration that we can also do this on an eye-to-eye level with all of us and discussing relevant business decisions or challenging topics, developing the strategy, etc., which I feel is like the modern world, how you want to work as a C-suite.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting you mentioned that the Germans being direct and the English being polite. And yeah, I spoke at a conference a few years ago, and what's interesting, it was right before COVID, so a lot of speakers dropped out. So I ended up speaking on like 3 different times at the conference, even though I was only scheduled to speak once. And I began to realize that the Brits found my communication perhaps a little bit on the off-putting side, because it just, if it enters my head, it's coming out my mouth, like a lot of Americans. But yes, they're so polite that, they were probably appalled by the way I was acting, even though to me it was just normal behavior. So,
yeah, that's the beauty of a global company. That's the beauty of different culture perspective. But also, I guess there's a lot you can learn out of this and kind of review and reflect on your own behavior, on your own way of putting things, but also the way of thinking, which then hopefully should come to a much more diverse and much more enriched perspective.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you two have a fantastic partnership. And I want to ask a little about Awin. Recently, you've achieved some really significant growth in the affiliate marketing space. So I'm curious, what are some of the strategic initiatives that have helped you achieve that growth? And, what can we look forward to in the years ahead?
Yeah. I mean, indeed, we're very, very happy about this success. And we have kind of recently, like September last year, our new platform with tons of great new features for our customers to enable and to bring forward this idea of the partnership network, and also not only kind of supporting the classical affiliate marketing way as we did, like affiliate and like advertisers and publishers together, but also add new tech partners to help people grow their business and their partnerships. And we also recently came up with a lot of, let's say, the new features, which are kind of promoted on a quarterly base. You can watch them on LinkedIn. You can also follow them on the seasonal releases, where you do see a lot of these things being put forward.
Makes sense. So, and I'm curious, since you're the CFO, what are some of the financial challenges and opportunities that you face? And, it's interesting, people who don't work in rapidly growing companies, I think, underestimate it's actually challenging to run a financial operation for a company that's growing fast.
Yeah. I mean, on one end, right, I guess for many tech companies, it's this question about scalability.
Hmm.
How can you kind of scale the business in a healthy, profitable way? So that's definitely one of the challenges which we are also facing, right, where we are kind of looking into, I guess, different perspective. On one end, how can we kind of, with more automation, standardize our processes and make that so much easier for our partners, for our customers to interact with, streamline processes, also kind of harmonize things, which can be supportive for our partners. Although that's more, let's say, in the back office, but that helps all our partners, because the easier the processes are, the easier it is for our partners to interact with them. So that's definitely on one hand. Speaking of a global company, on the other hand, from financial challenges, is obviously you have such a broad development of how different economies are also evolving, right? You have one in the US, then we go to the other end to Australia, where the economic outlook and predictions are not exactly the same. And then you have core Europe. And then we also do have obviously a different starting point, where we have been recently pretty strong, as I mentioned earlier, in our European footprint. The US definitely a very huge, relevant and important market for us. So all these different views add another challenge from a global international perspective.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned technology, and it's been an interesting evolution because historically financial teams use technology. It was, reduce costs, compliance, those sorts of things. But the way you spoke about it, it sounds like not only that technology is giving you an advantage with your customers and, keeping ahead of the competition, but also that the finance team's deeply involved in it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, as always, one could do even more than we could do right now, right? But I would say yes. And it's exciting times, I guess, for all of us CFOs with the time of AI, KI, right? Like, what can you do? Where can you really get the benefit out of this? A lot of this sounds very exciting, but then obviously, I guess the next CFO question is, okay, what about my ROI? Does it really make sense to kind of go down this route? And I feel like there's a lot of experimenting with is necessary. We recently spoke with the Chat Fin guys. It's like an idea of Chat GPT, but more specifically on the financial sector, where they kind of sit on top of all your financial data. And then they give you like the same easy to use functionality as Chat GPT to ask whatever question you feel you want to get out of your financial data. And then the question is, do you already come up with the right use cases, right? Because just for asking random question, which you might also get out of your ERP system, is not the one which is really getting you the value add. So we need to start thinking in a different way and really defining these use cases. And I think these are super exciting times to really define what can really help you and what's worth the investment as well on certain of these initiatives. So I need to say I'm pretty happy to be in that specific role at the very moment, because there's a lot of exciting things ahead of us to be explored.
Okay, that's fantastic. And I'm curious, you mentioned that the team that you put together, obviously quite a bit of pride. So, but when you're building a strong financial team, it's crucial for any organization. What are the qualities you look for when you're putting that team together? Because with 100 people, you're going to have a lot of different skill sets and personalities and whatnot.
Absolutely. So I guess the first topic is kind of I feel I need the right mindset from people joining us. So I feel like obviously you need skill set and you need certain, let's say, education in financial topics, depending on if you're looking more into the FP&A section or more into the accounting or depending or tax or whatever. But even more important is that you have to have people with the right mindset who want to be, we talked about problem solving earlier, right? Someone who's ready to deep dive into a problem, to come up with solutions, proposals, etc. Because I feel you could always help and support people if they need to kind of learn a little more on certain specific skill set or topics. Learning a mindset or the attitude is or it's, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's much more difficult. So if you have the right people around you with the right mindset, that's so much easier. An ideal combination, you have both. You find someone who has the great skill set, brings all the right education and the right mindset. But sometimes, as we all know, there is potentially the decision you need to make, what's more important. So that's one. I feel like, on the other hand, I really enjoy working with diverse teams. So, and I'm not speaking just about the gender component, right? It's very much about different cultural backgrounds. It's about having different thoughts. If you think about specifically in finance, someone who's more towards the risk, someone who's more risk averse, right? Obviously, someone who's doing my tax, I would love him to be more risk averse. Yeah, that makes sense.
Sure.
Someone doing my FP&A VP, I would love him to be very much disruptive and challenging everything and being a great business partner. So, but that brings already, if I look into my remit, a very diverse thinking patterns, if that makes sense, from the different colleagues. And that sometimes can be super challenging because these people are very demanding when they kind of want to get in one room and you want to get to a conclusion. But I feel that always brings us to better decisions and better outcomes. So I'm more than happy to take the sometimes potentially little pain of challenging, but for the greater good.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, diverse team, you want people, and you're in a great position. You can get, from all over the world. You want every generation. Gen X can contribute a lot. Gen Z and baby boomers, they need to have a voice at the table. It sounds like you've got a great philosophy on bringing those voices together.
Yes, it really so far it works pretty well.
Cool. Well, anyway, I want to change the subject up a little bit, and I always like to ask people about if they have a fun fact or an interesting hobby or just something about them that might be surprising to people. Do you have a fun fact, Virpy?
I do. I guess I asked some colleagues and some friends, to be fair, how would you describe this? And the picture I'm often getting is like this energizing bunny. You have like, I guess it originally had been an advertising campaign for the batteries, like the Duracell batteries. I don't know if this is known in the US, but
Oh,
it's
yeah, it
this
was a huge
bunny
campaign.
drumming all the time.
Yeah, a little toot, toot, toot. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is what a lot of people, as well in my professional, as well as in my private, like colleagues, friends, etc., kind of giving this feedback is, wow, you have a ton of energy and this seems to never end. And that's why they always come up with this Energizer Bunny picture. Yeah, so I guess that might be a fun fact.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if what's interesting, Virpy, is that may be spread further than you know, because when prepping for this call, I was talking to people on your comms teams, and she actually shared it with me as well. So,
Okay.
so even the marketing folks know you're the Energizer Bunny. So
Well,
I in the last job I had as a CFO, my nickname was Darth Vader. So
wow.
it's apparently somebody said I walk like Darth Vader. It wasn't that I was this evil force, but I just had like a Darth Vader type walk, and people would play the Imperial March in their head when they'd see me walking towards them. That was the only time in my life I've ever been compared to him, but it wouldn't go away. Cool. But I'd love to chat with you a little bit because you have a lot going on. You're a CFO, busy company. Do you have any secrets or advice for work-life balance?
I always think that's a very subjective question, right? Because obviously everyone is different and everyone defines this slightly different for him or herself. From my perspective, which helps me a lot is like I really enjoy listening to music, which is on my way to work and on my way back, which could either be on my bike or in my convertible car, which I love, to kind of getting a little the idea of being outside. And it takes me an hour to go to work, no matter if I take the car or the bike. So it's kind of really this moment per day, like if I'm not working in a home office, right, where you really get this little time for me, which really helps me to kind of prep to my for the day when going, or kind of relaxing and a little let go before you're coming back into your family life, right? You know, it's busy. Your kids want your attention, and you really need to kind of get a little distance between the two. I also do a lot of yoga, which I started like, I guess, something like 8-10 years ago, which also gives me a little like this 1 hour kind of escaping out of everything else and really focusing. Yeah, I guess that's something which helps me. But no matter what it is, I guess the advice is very much everyone should find or define for him or herself, what is this, what helps me? And that can be whatever. That can be sport, that can be reading, that can be running, that can be cooking, whatever. But this kind of little escape where people have a moment just for themselves to relax, I guess that's very important.
Yeah, that's great advice. And what kind of music do you listen to?
Oh, that's a huge variety. That
Okay.
can be from very much German rock into just like the pop stuff, and it can be French chanson.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm a headbanger, which people are surprised to hear about me. In fact, it's why I named this podcast Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, because
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
yeah. So yeah, most people, because I'm kind of mellow, and they find out I'm into bands like Metallica and AC/DC. And do you know those bands? I don't know if they'd be known in Germany.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, and they're like, what? I don't know. They think I'm more of a Billy Joel type or something like that. So, but cool. Well, I think that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just because you said AC/DC, right? I'm living close to Olympic Stadium, a huge area where we used to have concert, 80,000 people fitting in here. And I remember my son was kind of 6, and there was an AC/DC concert. It's like 15 years ago. And he watched a lot of, let's say, more 50, 60 years old people going to the concert. He looked at me and said like, Mom, I thought concert is something for young people. I said like,
Ooh, ow.
AC/DC is a little more like not only for young people, they have a wide range of people liking that music. So this is why you see kind of not only young people, but also kind of people in their 50s, 60s kind of going to the concert. But that was always where I thought like, okay, kids' perspective, right? They have a different one.
Yeah, that's the definition of old changes as the older we get, right? I'm 60 as of a few weeks ago, and I used to think, I remember my parents when they were 60. I think of them the way I think of a 150-year-old now. They just seem, absolutely ancient at the time, but here I am. So cool. Well, I'd love to get your perspective, since you've had such an interesting career to this point, embraced technology, done some globalization things, but how do you see the role of the CFO evolving over the next several years?
I mean, even more and more, it has already evolved a lot, right? When I kind of remember when I started working, we had a CFO at the time who was very much of the old school type of guy, right? It was very much number crunching. We were always kind of a little, I would even say, afraid of him. Like when he called, I need these numbers. Okay, yes, gonna deliver. Very strict way of how it was handled.
Did we work together? I worked with that guy. So
yeah.
Mhm.
And then obviously kind of, evolving much more into what it is already in many modern companies, potentially not all, but I would consider every company which would be interesting to me, where you have this much more, as you mentioned earlier, relation to the CEO being seen as a business partner for the C-suite, acting as this. And I think that's going to evolve even more into really like challenging, but also always in value adding, and not for the sake of just putting a finger in any difficult situation, but also coming with we spoke about problem solving, right? Saying,
Sure.
okay, I spotted this is difficult. What can we do about it? Here is the initiatives and the ideas. I guess, which could be even, I mean, potentially more interesting for CFOs in the classical education, like to having a little more of these potentially like sales background to people to really get a different perspective. Not losing the strong foot on the numbers and the understanding of the business from a number perspective, but more understanding what are the challenges on the sales side. So potentially even having a mandatory piece in working within sales to also understand what we usually need to challenge, right? Hey, how can we keep on with the margins? What are we doing on pricing, etc.? So that could be something I could think how we should further evolve. But in general, it's very much in terms of adding or growing this role of a business partner to add value to whatever company you're working for.
So, no, I think that's a really interesting perspective on it. And yeah, CFO is learning to do sales. I wonder if my listeners might think the opposite might be true, that salespeople ought to do a rotation in finance to appreciate that as well. So cool. Well,
fair point.
That being said, I always love to get the advice for the next generation of CFOs from our guests. So, what are the things they should be thinking of to land that first CFO job and then to excel in it and flourish when they get it? Do you have any advice for the next gen?
Yeah, I guess the first thing which pops to my mind is kind of stay curious. You are the next generation. You are able to kind of ask questions, never take anything for granted, try to understand things. So all this in putting in stay curious, right? I feel on the other hand, and I know sometimes it might be hard to get this balance between, hey, you have potentially someone still in this role, or you have at least an environment where you have some legacy, where I guess it's fair not to offboard anything, because there is also some good in some of the experience and some of the things to understand, but find a way how one can combine relevant pieces out of the experience, being disruptive and challenge this from a new perspective, bring your own ideas, and then hopefully combine this to a win-win where you do a little like potentially of a cherry picking of doing like the best out of both worlds and take that forward. I would feel adding to this, being self-reflective is something which definitely, I guess this is not only for the young generation, this is so for everyone. It always feels very helpful to do some self-reflection on your own and also be open to be challenged, because sometimes we might not be as self-reflective on our own, but it's quite helpful to have other people challenging you and take that serious, take feedback as a gift, basically.
Okay. That's the first time someone has mentioned being self-reflective as advice. So I think that's fantastic. So Virpy, this has been a lot of fun and, some great information for the listeners. So I'd like to just give you the final word if you have one.
I mean, if I may, I would like to kind of do a little advertising, because what we do from Awin is an amazing thing of a global think tank happening next year in Portugal, where we invite all our partners to an amazing conference of the affiliate marketing space with great keynote speakers, etc. And we know it's potentially a little far from thinking, oh, it's Europe, it's Portugal, but it's absolutely worth it, because it's a great opportunity to get together with the industry. And that might be something which is really worth putting on your radar. And another one to kind of combine with this is an amazing also podcast, which we are starting, which is a Awin Win marketing podcast. So we have a double win here.
Okay. So
starting in September, specifically in the US, with some amazing brands. On one hand, from our advertiser like the McGee & Co., Shark Ninja. On the other hand, partners like Creator IQ. So I guess stay tuned. That's very, very I'm very much looking forward to listening to this.
Okay. Well, when the podcast is available, let me know. We'll give a link to it on this episode. So,
amazing.
Virpy, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jack.
One of the things that I find fascinating is that Awin has adopted, and for a while now, as I understand it, the idea of a 4-day week. And I'm curious what inspired that decision. And, clearly it's working, or you would have abandoned it, but how it's working out and what advice you can give to other leaders.
Yeah, it has been a great initiative, which basically started together with COVID, right? What is at the time when we felt a lot of pressure on all our teams kind of managing in parallel all your family commitments, whatever in which direction, combined to the work ones, having homeschooling, home office, everything which changed overnight across the world. That we were looking into this and felt we need to give a little more flexibility to our teams. And this is when we basically started on our, what we called at the time, Vision 2023, in terms of making it more remote work feasible, working as well wherever you want, like obviously some tax requirements and things to be noted. But then also making it more flexible on the time of working, which ended in a 4-day work week, or the flexi week, as we call it. And yes, we have rolled this out as a pilot phase, first of all, for 1.5 years to also view after the pre-COVID environment, and then had rolled it out now permanently. And yes, it has been a great success, is obviously specifically talking about younger generation, right? Where you also feel like, wow, they're looking much more rightfully looking after work-life balance and checking on these things. So obviously that gives much more flexibility to whatever our team members want to do. This can be from doing their masters on the day off. It's from taking personal commitments, is learning another language, sports, whatever they want to do. And we need to see from a company perspective, it was really a huge benefit. We did not see any productivity drop, sometimes even increase. So obviously very much on the metrics, you're also kind of looking at these things. But yeah, I could absolutely recommend, and more than happy if anyone, as you said, what can we recommend? If anyone wants to kind of chat on this, I'm more than happy. Contact me on my LinkedIn profile, whatever. More than happy to go into individual discussions.
Well, that's fantastic. And it's interesting because I've always felt that if the productivity is the same, and it seems like it might even be a slight increase, there's no reason not to do it, because it's going to help you with recruiting, retention. It's just going to make, happier employees, which in turn is going to improve performance and everything else. So fantastic. Congratulations for successfully rolling that out.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Payhawk and Plantful for their support of the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. Rock on.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.